Hi, my name is Gavin Henning, Professor of Higher Education at New England College, and also President for the Council for the Advancement of Standards in Higher Education. In this little mini lecture, I want to give you an overview of the program review process as CAS talks about it. So I want to kind of outline the different steps, how you can use CAS for program review, and really what does it look like. First of all, a little bit of background on program review. There's roots in academics, particularly accreditation. And accreditation is really about peer review. That's the basis of it, even though there's a connection to financial aid and federal funding. The whole essence of the basis of accreditation is about doing a self-study and then having that reviewed by peers. And that's really mirrors the academic program review process as well. It's an opportunity to align and collaborate across a department or even across multiple departments. And CAS actually started program review as early as 1989. So we've been doing it for a little bit, and we have a process that seems to work for folks. So the goal is to use a holistic assessment tool to provide a big picture evaluation of the health of the department. And that holistic tool is a self-assessment guide, which is a worksheet that walks through each one of the standards within a set of standards. It's a process that really is based on self-reflection and evaluation. CAS is all about self-assessment, not necessarily external evaluation, because we really need to be able to own this and to evaluate our own work. And so our goal really is continual improvement, and that we reach that through reflection and gathering data to help us know how effective our unit is. But we also want you to adapt CAS to your needs. There are a lot of different ways you can do this. I think about a CAS program review on a continuum, from very rigorous down to kind of what I call doable. So it could be as simple as the director of an office walks through the standards and gives an evaluation on those standards based on their own perspective. That might be something that a new director of department does based on their observations as a starting point to figure out where does this department need to go. It could be a similar process, but held with staff at a staff meeting. So the staff talk through each element, each standard in a set of standards, and give themselves a rating based on their perception. This is better than nothing, but obviously it's better to have evidence to support those evaluations. Could be a self-study only on a specific section. Maybe there are time constraints. Maybe there's a specific area of the department that people are really going to focus on. It could be mission program. Maybe you're really interested in like the organization piece of it. Are we organized in the right way? Are we using technology in the way we should? Perhaps it's about assessment, the assessment part. And so you could do a self-study on any one of the sections of the standards. And it's really trying to use data to understand your strengths and areas of improvement. So really that could be the sole focus. We got to know what's working, what's not working, and how to make improvements. Or we can do a full-scale self-study. Typically takes anywhere from 9 to 18 months, depending on how comprehensive it is, and depending on how much data needs to be collected. There could be a lot of data that already exists or already collected in an ongoing way, which makes the self-study process a lot easier. But if new data needs to be collected and processes need to be set up to collect that data, it takes a lot longer. So really anywhere in between that continuum is useful. And CAS wants you to use a process that works for you, to use the standards in a way that works for you. We're not dictating any certain way. We certainly are guiding and providing suggestions, but the goal really is self-study for program improvement to create quality programs and services that support student learning and development. So let's take a look at the basic assessment cycle. 4 steps. There are also different steps depending on which one you may look at, but they really cover the same types of things. Establish the outcomes, provide the programs and services to meet those outcomes, determine effectiveness through data collection and analysis, and then use those results for improvement. So here's what a CAS review can look like when you add it into this. So you really use some of those foundational documents to guide the criteria for success, to determine some outcomes and targets. Provide those programs and services based on that. Gather some data and some effectiveness, and then use the results for improvement. You may want to tweak some of your foundation goals. You may say, hey, we're really not achieving this mission. We need to tweak our mission. We're going to create a strategic plan, which I'll talk a little bit more in a second. We're actually going to make some improvements in our targets or outcomes. We may find an outcome that we never intended, and we said, wow, that's a great one. Let's add that to our repertoire. You could use the results to improve the programs and services themselves. You know, if we just tweak this a little bit, we'd be able to make a better program. You know, if we actually did this program bigger, we'd have a bigger impact. We could scale it up. And then really help you think about how do we determine success. So actually, you can even use the results to help you think through how are you going to assess in the future. So really, building program reviewing can be helpful in a lot of different ways. Also think about the use of data and use of program review in different types of assessment. So looking at student needs, specifically utilization, the students are utilizing departments, services, their satisfaction, their learning. We're looking more broadly at the services and operational aspect, looking at benchmarking, resource effectiveness, program outcomes, or program review. And program review really takes all of those elements together. I kind of think about it as a culminating type of assessment. Because in a program review, you want to use some benchmarking. You want to look at resource effectiveness. You want to see how effective you are at reaching program outcomes. You want to look at all those elements of the student impact there and their student elements. So the needs, are we meeting their needs? Are their services being utilized? Are students satisfied? Are they actually learning through the program outcomes that we've identified in the programs and services we're providing? So really think through, how does program review fit into all these pieces? Is that where you want to go? And program review also fits into the strategic planning cycle. So really, it's an element of all kinds of assessment and planning processes. The program review can really provide some direction for the action plan, for where you want to go. The action plan is then implemented. Data is gathered to help understand the effectiveness or meeting the targets in that plan. And then there's your preparation for the program review again to really get a sense of, are you achieving what you want to do? And really going through and using the new analysis, the new review, to drive the priorities moving forward. So program review, even though it can be very intensive, can also be very, very helpful. So these are the 7 steps of the CAS self-assessment process. And I'll talk through each one of these more specifically. First of all, plan the process. Map out what you want to do, what your outcomes are, what do you want to achieve, what's your timeline, who are the stakeholders, really what do you want to have come out of this experience. So assemble and educate the team. How big does your team need to be? Who should they include? Should students be a part of that? How many representatives from different offices do you want to include? Train them on on CAS, some basic concepts and principles of self-assessment. And then move into the stage a lot of people consider as assessment. Identify, collect, and review the evidence. So figure out, do we have data already that we can use? Do we need to collect some new ones? Use the guidance and the self-assessment guides to help you determine what you need. Then begin to review that evidence. Then once you've reviewed that, take a look to make some determinations and use that criteria to make some decisions to the extent of which each of the standards are being met. And there are a couple of different ways to do that, and I'll talk about that in a second. Build the action plan. So thinking about where are our strengths, where are some opportunities for improvement, how can we actually use the strengths to help us manage the areas we're not so strong in. And begin thinking about what is the action plan to make the department stronger. Put together that report, share it with appropriate stakeholders, considering that different stakeholders may want different formats and different information to report. And the final stage, which is really the most important, is using that information to close the loop. So actually making change based on those recommendations, but needing to think about what resources will we need? What are the barriers that will happen to us making these changes? Who needs to buy into the process? All of those things are going to help you close the loop effectively. And again, if the loop doesn't close, if you don't use those recommendations for change, then the whole process is not worth the time and money you put into it. Again, the self-assessment guides, they are the main tool for doing the self-study process. Each section has broken down into something similar to this. This is the ethics section. There is some suggested evidence you may want to gather for each section. So here it includes codes of ethics, ethics statements, some policies. If it were human resource, it'd be a different set of suggested evidence. There is then the criterion measures, the rating scale. And now we've clustered different standards together in similar areas. So we can actually look at providing an evaluation for a set of standards rather than each individual standard. And then there's an opportunity to give a narrative explanation. Why was that the rating given? And that will be helpful later when you begin thinking through the action step planning and even what kind of evidence do you need moving forward. Do you not have evidence in an area? Do you need to collect more evidence? What might that look like? And so all of those can provide that. And so that's really what an example of a self-assessment guide, and that would be the tool for that program review process. So here's some decisions to be made beforehand. So what is the purpose? Are you looking at quality assurance? Are you looking just at figure out what are some of the strengths and weaknesses are? Do you need to defend the resources that you have? Do you need to defend a program? How much do you want to know? Do you want to do this extensive study or just a snapshot at the time? Is your goal to enhance collaboration, enhance consistency between multiple sites? Maybe you need more funding, or maybe you need to defend the funding that you have. And so you go through the program review process. So think about what your goal is and what your end result is for that process. So think about what the current assessment landscape is. Think about what it's like in your department. What is it like on campus? Is it a centralized process? Is it decentralized? How will that impact the program review process? How easy is it to get data from other parts of the institution that you may not already have? Can you just call up your colleague in institution research and get it? Or is there actually a multiple step process for accessing it? Again, thinking about what are the steps you'll need to go through to implement this study. What's the timeline that will work? What's doable? Build in some buffer time because there's always something that's going to take longer than you anticipate, or some other activity or some other situation arises that stalls the program review probably appropriately, but build in some of that buffer time. And then think through what are the outcomes of that self-study. Just like assessment itself, you need to know what is the end result. And so think about that for this process as well. Pull together the team. Think about who are the key stakeholders. Who are your detractors? Who are the biggest critics? Involve them. Do you want to involve students? If so, how? Think about what role they play. Consider the power dynamics between people. What would it be like if the director of the department understudies on that committee? What happens if they're the chair? How does that impact the way the team works? And set up processes that seem to fit. Maybe a chair, co-chairs, something else. Do you have administrative support to help do that? And really begin to then pull that team together and educate that team on what they need to do. So they should review the standards and criteria. Need to be talk about what each of those items on the reading scale mean, even though people may understand, can read the definition, may have different understandings of that. And so they really need to talk through what does meets expectations really mean. Agree on guidelines for how the group is going to talk. Honesty is critical in this process because if folks aren't honest, then you're not going to get a valid or credible result. And so it really requires some guidelines around honesty, around trust, so that people can give the best and most credible response. Think about expectations for timelines, responsibilities, and process. Have everybody step up to the plate to meet their responsibilities in the timeline you all set out. So if that does not happen, the process is going to take a lot longer than anticipated. And then discuss what the group's final product looks like. What do you really hope to get out of this? What do you all envision in the process? Then go out there and collect that data, identify what you need, review that evidence. Again, the focus should be on evidence-based evaluation. While you can certainly go through and do an evaluation based on your perceptions, those perceptions may not be correct. So use the evidence for the evaluation process. Make sure you have evidence that will help you make those decisions. And if you don't have the appropriate evidence, you have to go out and collect it. But also think about, as you move forward, which evidence should you be collecting on an annual basis so that the next time you go ahead and do a program review, the data is already there. And also data from multiple years. Consider the learning communication styles for people in the team. I'm an internal processor, so I may need to actually sit with some of the evidence before I begin a conversation. And so I appreciate having the information sent to me prior to a meeting so I can review it, rather than trying to review it in a meeting, process it, and then try to be part of a conversation all at the same time. And then determine how to best share the workload. You really want to balance this out, make the process equitable for everybody. And have some discussion and guidelines around that in terms of who's going to do what, in terms of the collecting it, the reviewing it. Just make sure it's a balanced process. So evidence to support those evaluative judgments. So here's some things you might want to take a look at. So program documents, mission statements, handbooks, brochures, evaluations, anything that may be related to that. You may, for the organizational piece, you may want some administrative documents, purpose, philosophy statements, mission statement also how often it's, or last time it was updated. Org charts might be helpful, as well as financial statements. You may want some annual reports from staff, their vita, just to demonstrate that you have people that are appropriate for these roles. Any other scholarship activities. Any other assessment data that you may have that's collected either internally to the program or externally as part of the institution. There could be some national survey data like NESI or something else that may be helpful. And you might want some information about students, some student activity reports, what students are doing, their accomplishments, employment experiences, those types of things. And marking materials might be helpful. But my suggestion is to, before you even begin the process, walk through the self-assessment guide, begin identifying for each section what type of evidence you'll need. You may want to create a spreadsheet that has a list of all the evidence and then noting what you have, what you don't have, and think of what do you want to collect. Don't just pull all this stuff together without any idea where it may fit. So really kind of be intentional about the identification and collection process. And there are a couple of different ways to approach the ratings. We actually suggest that people do individual ratings first, again, because some people are internal processors. And this actually may save some time in the long run, because if you have people do some individual ratings on their own and you come together as a group, you don't really need to hash out the ratings that everybody agrees on. You really you only need to focus then on the ones that people disagree on and you try to come to consensus around that. So one thing I've done in the past is I've actually had people input their individual ratings into a spreadsheet or even into a Google form, because that way they can't see other ratings. And then you can pull up on that spreadsheet and be able to see for each individual what was the rating for each set of for each cluster of standards. You'll be able to easily see where there's disagreement, how much disagreement is there, or is there just a lot of agreement, and then you can kind of move on from there. And then you need to interpret those ratings. Think through, what are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? When you have upwards of 255 individual standards, you really have to do some reduction of the data to understand really what are the most compelling pieces of that program review. Then develop the action plan. So I suggest identifying the top third as strengths, the bottom third as weaknesses, and really focusing on those two ends, because there's just so much information in there. But I've worked with another institution, and they, the way they approached it was, we don't necessarily want to bolster up everything that's really, really low, because some of that will take a lot of resources, a lot of time. There may be some things where we may even be meeting expectations or just below that, and with just a little bit of effort, we can actually bump that up a lot. So think through when your focus is what you want to place your priorities on. Think through what is most important. What are some things we can probably bump up the rating pretty easily, and what are maybe more long-term improvements that will require more resources, more planning, some more time to actually do. Be sure to make recommendations for next steps. Think through what is that plan for actually implementing all this. A list of recommendations isn't going to be helpful. You really need to have the recommendations, the strategies for achieving those recommendations, a list of the resources that are needed, a time frame by which this will happen, and responsible individuals. Because if nobody's responsible for any of these action steps, it's quite likely that they won't be finished. So you need to add those individuals to that. Then prepare the report. What information you want to share. You typically want to provide an overview of what happened. You want a brief executive summary, a quick outline, and then some more details. Think through what are the different formats that you want for different groups. what do people need and what do people want? It's helpful to explain the mission, purpose, and philosophy of the department. Include a summary of the process that was followed. So think about this as the methodology that would be you'd find in a research paper or dissertation or a journal article. Summarize the findings, including the strengths and weaknesses. Don't force your reader to make interpretations. Help them with the interpretation. Because you're the ones that spent all the time with this data. You're the experts, and so use that. Make that interpretation of the evidence, of the results, and then based on that, make some recommendations. And then those would be the key elements of that report. And then you have to close the loop and manage change. This is one of those steps sometimes we just tend to think that happens, but closing the loop is a change process, and we need to really think about this as a change process. So really make a tactical plan for incorporating recommendations, specific actions that need to be taken place. Communicate that plan. Get buy-in from stakeholders. And it'd be helpful to align your actions with other strategic plans. Because if you can align it with either institutional, departmental, or divisional strategic plans, it's more likely that you'll be able to implement those steps. And then think about what additional resources you need. Is it time? Is it money? Is it staff? Is it training, perhaps? Think about what those resources are and make a solid case for those. So here are a few tips. Plan for administrative support. You'll need somebody to help gather that information, to help sort it, to help with some of that processing, help set up meetings. So what is that administrative support you have? Be really clear on workload expectations. So you may have to work with a director or department leader to pull some things off plates for folks during this time so they can actually contribute and put the appropriate amount of time into the process. Define your rating scale, and so people are in agreement for what each rating on the rating scale stands for. Have detailed timelines, but as I mentioned earlier, build in some buffer time, because that's every time I've done something, I've needed some kind of buffer. And then if you need to be able to demonstrate the evidence, as you're going through and collecting that evidence and reviewing it, you may want to tag or highlight some of those things that are representative examples. So if you need to pull that out and add that into a report or demonstrate that to somebody else, you can easily pull those examples. Make sure you document the rationale for your rating. You're going to have, if you go back later on, you're going to wonder, why do we give ourselves did not meet expectations? And so put your rationale in there. Again, be honest, be critical, because that's what's going to be more useful. You might want to incorporate informational interviews to really get a sense of what's going on. A committee may not have a 360-degree perspective on any issue or any department. And so you may want to get additional input from other folks, but you don't want to make the committee too big, or you don't want to put too many demands on others' time. So you can do this through informational interviews. And then adapt the process to your needs. Tweak it however you want to. We want it to work for you. And just a reminder, the 10th edition of the book is coming out in spring 2019, so watch for that. We'll be adding a lot more resources to help you do your work related to CAS standards, so keep an eye out for those. Connect with CAS either through the 2 Facebook user groups that you can get to through Facebook for 2-year professionals as well as for 4-year professionals. Just follow us on Facebook for updates, as well as Twitter, or take a look at our YouTube channel for resources that you can use in your work with CAS. Visit cas.edu. We have our store there with a lot of resources, as well as a resource center has a lot of free stuff that you can take a look at, people that have shared. Continue to use the 9th edition of the book until the 10th edition comes out, and get your hand on self-assessment guides, because those are the critical tool for self-assessment. They're available through the CAS website, or if you're a Campus Labs member campus, you can actually access these through the program review module through Campus Labs. So I hope this was informative. Hope you give you some background on actually using CAS for program review. But if you have any questions, check us out at cas.edu or send us an email, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.